Welcome. This is the Film Symbologist, and in this video we will be further exploring the relationship between Weyland and David and the engineers and xenomorphs in order to better understand Ridley Scott's 2012 science fiction film Prometheus. Check out my channel for other videos in the Prometheus series. By the end of this video, we should gain some insight into the Deacon-Xenomorph in particular. What is it? Did the engineers find it or create it? And most importantly, what does it represent? Soon after arriving on LV-223 and landing in a valley near a row of pyramidal structures, a cohort of the Prometheus spaceship's crew ventures out to explore one of the pyramids. During their exploration, they come across an engineer corpse that has been decapitated in a doorway, which is one of many thresholds or chances for the characters to pause and consider their next step that the members of the crew choose to pass through. The crew brings the head back onto the ship to study. Oddly, the scientists decide to send an electric current through the decapitated head to see if they can reanimate it. In reality, this bizarre decision would likely result in the scientists and doctors losing their credentials. But in the film, this can be understood as an example of a cultural reference that can help the audience understand what is really going on. In 1817, at the age of 20, English author Mary Shelley finished writing her gothic horror novel Frankenstein. Seen by many as the first work of science fiction, Frankenstein tells a tragic story of ambition, obsession, yearning, and despair. Set in the 18th century, the events of the story begin with the character Robert Walton, the captain of a ship, as he and his crew explore the Arctic Circle in hopes of discovering something of scientific significance that could be valuable to society and bring notoriety to Walton. While the crew is slowly navigating through the frozen Arctic in their vessel, they catch a glimpse of a gigantic figure traveling across the ice by dog sled in the distance. Sometime later, the crew encounters a man nearly frozen to death on the ice, so they bring him on board. When the man eventually comes to, he identifies himself to the crew as Victor Frankenstein, an ambitious and obsessive scientist who shares much in common with the ship's captain, Walton. Frankenstein explains that he was out on the ice pursuing the giant that the crew saw earlier. The scientist then recounts to the crew the events that led up to this moment. At a young age, Victor developed an interest in alchemy, the medieval predecessor to chemistry, but he eventually transitions into the growing field of natural philosophy. Not long before the young Frankenstein leaves his home to study science at university, his mother dies. The fledgling scientist plunges into his studies and experiments as a coping mechanism. Frankenstein is obsessed with pushing the boundaries of science, unlocking the mysteries to life, and conquering death. At one point, Victor pauses from recounting his backstory to issue a warning to Walton. "Learn from me," he tells the captain, "if not by my precepts, at least by my example. How dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow." Frankenstein then resumes his story, telling Walton that to conduct his experiments he scavenged cadavers and compiled a body that he intended to reanimate into a beautiful superhuman being. Eventually, Victor successfully reanimates the body into a creature of enormous height and strength, but its physical appearance is grotesque. Though the description is intentionally ambiguous in the novel, it is commonly believed that Frankenstein harnessed lightning to assist in the reanimation process. Victor is horrified by his monstrous creation, abandons the creature, and tries to move on with his life by shifting his focus onto other academic interests and building a life with his partner. Meanwhile, the creature, feeling rejected by Victor, flees into hiding and begins learning how to speak and read by observing local families from afar. The creature also learns about humanity by reading literature. At various times, the creature's attempts to interact with people are met with further rejection, fear, and disgust. In one such instance, the creature observes a young girl fall into a river and begin drowning. With water flowing quickly around the girl, the creature jumps in and rescues her. However, when the girl's guardian arrives on the scene and sees the creature, he is horrified by the creature's appearance and, in a panic, shoots and wounds the creature. As a result of incidents like this, the creature becomes bitter and vows revenge against mankind for their treatment. The creature seeks out Victor, ends up killing the scientist's brother, and manages to frame Frankenstein's family's nanny for the crime. One day, the creature confronts Victor and tells him about the process of survival, learning, and mistreatment the creature has experienced since being created. The creature demands that Frankenstein create a partner that will accept and understand the creature and be a companion. Frankenstein initially agrees to do so, but later decides not to complete another experiment for fear of what may happen, including the prospect of the two creatures mating and producing a race of monstrous beings capable of destroying mankind. This further enrages the creature and bolsters the creature's resolve to punish Frankenstein. The night after Victor's wedding, the creature kills the scientist's wife, then goes on the run. With Frankenstein in close pursuit, the creature travels across Europe, Russia, and eventually the Arctic Circle, where the creature's physical superiority outperforms Victor, who collapses on the ice before being found by Walton's exploratory crew. The story concludes with Frankenstein attempting to rally the crew of Walton's ship to join the scientist in his pursuit to kill the creature. While the tragedy of Frankenstein's story is not enough to dissuade Walton from wanting to continue his expedition deeper into the Arctic, the remaining crew, having already lost several members to the cold, wants to return south. Frankenstein succumbs to the cold and dies. Not wanting a mutiny, Walton decides not to continue Frankenstein's pursuit and instead agrees to return home with his crew. Frankenstein's creature, having snuck onto the ship, mourns Victor and tells the crew that Frankenstein's death has not brought closure to the creature. Instead, it has brought feelings of remorse, misery, and lacking purpose. The creature vows to end its own suffering once and for all, and then disappears out into the ice. Despite having been published over 200 years ago, the themes explored in Mary Shelley's novel, whose full title is Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, are still relevant today. The story of Frankenstein warns that venturing into the far reaches of habitable places, exploring the fringes of scientific knowledge, and seeking to reach beyond man's grasp is a recipe for disaster. It is no wonder why Ridley Scott drew from the gothic novel for this science fiction film. While the audience is told very little about the engineers and Deacon-Xenomorph directly, and Scott purposefully depicts them as mysterious, the story of Frankenstein may offer us some insight. The arrangement of the black goo vases and the prominence of the relief sculpture in the big headroom seemed to indicate that the engineers were conducting some kind of ritualistic experiments related to the Deacon-Xenomorph. While the film does not provide definitive answers about the Deacon-Xenomorph depicted in the relief sculpture, it seems to share a resemblance to the creature we see at the very end of the film. The audience can infer that the engineers may have been obsessed with understanding the secrets to life, transforming chemistry into biology, and conquering death. To me, the relief sculpture is representative of what the engineers viewed as the ideal creature they hoped to bring into the world. Like Frankenstein's creature, I imagine the engineers may have collected the remains of dead or extinct xenomorph-like species from their voyages across the universe, compiled them, and distilled their essence as part of the black goo manufacturing process. The extent to which the Deacon from the relief sculpture resembles the species from which the engineers may have harvested remains is unclear, but if Frankenstein is a helpful guide, we can assume the engineers were attempting to reanimate the Deacon, at least in part, from the carcasses of pre-existing life forms. According to Yannick, the black goo got released and resulted in the annihilation of the engineers. If Yannick is correct, should the audience assume that the incident 2,000 years ago consisted of the black goo creating the idealized Deacon-Xenomorph, which killed the engineers? I don't think so. A more likely explanation is that the engineers were killed on the remote moon, far from their homeworld, by grotesque monsters more similar to the transformed Fifield than to the Deacon. This helps explain the sleep apnea engineers' reaction to the crew of the Prometheus. The engineers may, like Ash, revere the Deacon-Xenomorph as the perfect organism and a symbol for their superior intellects. The engineers on LV-223 seem to have bioengineered themselves to more closely resemble the Deacon, and they apparently had similar plans for transforming mankind, whom the engineers viewed as inferior and imperfect. So when the last engineer sees that Weyland has created a creature in his own imperfect image, rather than the perfect image of the Deacon, it makes sense that the man and his android are both destroyed. In a previous video, I discussed how Geppetto and Pinocchio from the 1940 animated film offer a stark contrast to Weyland and David. The relationship between Victor Frankenstein and his creature from Mary Shelley's novel depicts a relationship more like that of Weyland and David's. During his TED Talk, Peter Weyland describes his ambition.
We are now 3 months into the year of our Lord, 2023. At this moment in our civilization, we are on the verge of terraforming planets undiscovered just a decade ago. We can create cybernetic individuals who, in just a few short years, will be completely indistinguishable from us. How is there a law that states if we build a man from wires and metal, a man who will never grow old, who will never feel the heat of a star or the cold of the moon, how is the creation of such an incredible individual considered unnatural? For those of you who know me, you will be aware by now that my ambition is unlimited. You know that I will settle for nothing short of greatness, or I will die trying.
Weyland follows his ambition out beyond our home planet to Mars to establish a terraforming operation. Upon accepting a proposal from Shaw to fund a scientific expedition to LV-223, Weyland is frozen in a cryosleep pod and placed on board the Prometheus ship. After he regains consciousness and recovers from having been on ice, Weyland follows his creature David through the harsh environment of the distant moon, where the ambitious man dies while in pursuit of greatness. As for David, he is the unnatural creation of a megalomaniac. Made up of inanimate wires and metal, David has been animated into artificial life. He wields great and superhuman capabilities, yet he is dismissed and treated with contempt by most natural-born people. In David's isolation on the Prometheus ship, he watches movies, learns to speak languages, and observes human relationships from afar.
Why did he die?
Sooner or later, everyone does.
Like Mummy.
Like Mummy.
Where do they go?
Everyone has their own word. Heaven. Paradise.
Perhaps one of the reasons David watches Shaw's dreams is because he desires to see what a loving relationship between a father and his offspring is like. Almost any time David attempts to interact with people, though, he is misunderstood, disrespected, or treated as an outcast. In one such instance, David observes Shaw being swept off the Prometheus ship into a windstorm, With silica blowing violently around her and overwhelming her, the android jumps out of the ship and rescues her. However, when everyone is getting into the ship's elevator, David asks if Shaw is alright, and Shaw's guardian figure, Holloway, shoots a glare at the android. These slights likely fuel David's dislike for humanity, respect for the engineers, eagerness to experiment with the black goo, and, as seen in Alien Covenant, his reverence for mankind's perfect killer, the xenomorphs. Poetically, the rejected android's quest for identity and purpose leads his creators to their deaths on a barren moon in the far reaches of space. In turn, while David's experiments on Holloway turned him into a monster, Holloway's research and thesis led David to LV-223, where the android is decapitated. Despite being infertile, Shaw is impregnated with Holloway's black goo-infected sperm. The unnatural conception results in rapid fetal development. Horrified, Shaw surgically removes the fetus, attempts to smother it with gas, and abandons the creature in the med pod, only to be saved from an engineer by the creature later. At the end of the film, Shaw, as the lone human survivor of the Prometheus expedition, is presented with a choice. She, like Walton, can choose to give up her ambition and return home, or she can continue her venture into the unknown in pursuit of knowledge. In the theatrical cut of the film, we are led to believe that Shaw convinces David to help her travel to the engineer's homeworld. In a deleted scene, David tells Shaw that the engineers come from paradise, which is the same word Shaw's father used to describe the place Shaw's mother went to when she died. David's offer to fly Shaw back to Earth is likely a misdirection to conceal David's true intent. He has no interest in returning to human society. He wants to embark on a new adventure, but to do so, he'll need Shaw's help. So he uses information gathered from watching her dreams to plant an idea in her head. Shaw believes she is headed for paradise, but I have my doubts. The death of Shaw's mother may have fueled an obsession within the scientists to discover the secrets to life after death and to find paradise. And while she doesn't die at the end of the film, will her ambition eventually catch up to her? And what about humanity? Are we a creature beloved by a benevolent creator? Or are we a monstrous creation resulting from some unnatural process? Who is our creator? Is he alive? Or like Frankenstein's creature, has man's relentless search for meaning, purpose, destiny, and our origins within the material universe led to the death of our creator, at least in our minds? Is our destiny set? Or do we, like Walton at the end of the novel, still have a choice about our path? In the next video, I will continue my analysis of Ridley Scott's Prometheus by taking a look at the creation story from Greek mythology of the film's namesake. Be sure to check out my channel for previous installments in the series. And if you enjoy content like this, like the video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. From the Film Symbologist, thanks for watching.